All right, hello and welcome to the IACR Distinguished Lecture Series. Today we would like to welcome Ugo Kravchuk, who is a Senior Principal Applied Scientist at Amazon Web Services. He was previously part of the founding team of the Algorand Foundation, an IBM Fellow and Distinguished Research Staff Member at IBM T.J. Watson Research Center, and an Associate Professor with the Department of Electrical Engineering at Technion. His areas of research span theoretical and applied aspects of cryptography, with particular emphasis on applications for network security, privacy, and authentication. He's worked on data encryption and authentication, key management, distributed cryptography, internet security, electronic commerce, payment systems, and many other kinds of cryptographic technologies. He's also contributed to internet standards from the early days of IPsec and IKE to more recent work on revamping the security of TLS, and is a co-designer of HMAC, the widely used message authentication and pseudorandom function. He's contributed also to the foundations of theoretical cryptography in areas such as pseudorandomness, zero knowledge, secure communications, distributed cryptography, and many more. And he believes that, contrary to the popular adage, that in cryptography, theory is truly practical, and cryptography without supporting theory is, in most cases, bad cryptography. He's authored more than 100 publications with over 30,000 citations and 30 issued patents. He's a fellow of the International Association of Cryptologic Research, and we are exceedingly proud to welcome him today as our IACR Distinguished Lecturer for Crypto 2023. Thank you, Ugo.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you to the IACR board for inviting me to give this, giving me this very special opportunity to talk here. The hardest part of preparing this talk was to decide what to talk about. There is so much amazing stuff going on in cryptography right now, but I did not want to give a very technical talk on some particular work. There are enough of those in the conference. So rather, I decided to do a lighter talk with some samples of my personal experience, anecdotes, and some of the recurrent subjects that have interested me over the years. These are a representation of my experience, their personal tests, and hopefully something you can relate to and maybe add to your own experience. So, well, the title of the talk is The Joy of Cryptography, a Personal Journey, and that's what I hope to convey here. So I really want to emphasize how amazing really it is to work in a field in constant evolution, where the relevance increases by the day and attracts some of the best young minds to it, you guys. And at the same time, how in spite of the constant influx of amazing ideas, new schemes, technology changes, past work keeps to a large extent its relevance over the years. And then again, in these times of what I call post-quantum uncertainty, we were presented with this opportunity of renewing and broadening our cryptographic landscape. So there are so many sources of awe in this area, the endless stream of young people and great ideas and new challenges. The sky is not a limit, it's not an exaggeration. I particularly find beauty in simplicity of design, crisp notions, also conceptual simplicity as a prerequisite for adoption into practice. Practice and technology bring a lot of complexity into the mix. For the crypto part to be used and deployed securely, it needs to be understood beyond professional cryptographers. You'll see simplicity, and to me, its best friend, modularity, as a recurrent subject in this presentation. And then we have this beautiful two-sided cryptographic coin. On one hand, the intimate relation of cryptography with complexity theory, notions like limits of computation, randomness. Cryptography is where negative results in complexity theory are positive, constructive. And on the other side of the coin, there is the fundamental role of cryptography in the well-being of the modern digital society, enabler of secure communications, secure computing, and hopefully increasingly protecting more of personal privacy and freedom. And these two aspects, theory and practice, are inextricably linked together in cryptography. There is no empirical or experimental evidence that will convince you of the security of a design, no computer simulation, testing, demos, anything like that, only mathematical modeling and proofs as the prime evidence for the security of a cryptographic design, together, of course, with years of cryptanalysis to validate our basic assumptions and the building blocks. So we need mathematical modeling and proof as the main evidence tool, but we also need to remember that proofs are never stronger than the models on which they are based. And there are no absolute models. They change depending on setting and scope and evolve over time. But in all, modeling and definitions in cryptography have been very successful in capturing practical needs and moving the field forward. So both complexity theoretic proofs and automated proofs are key here. I hope to see more of the latter, of the automated proofs, because proof verification and proofs writing lately in cryptography have become really challenging for writing proofs and verifying. So automated tools or verification tools should help here. And also automated tools can handle to some extent verification of specification and implementation, something that handwritten proofs cannot do. I'd also like to highlight what the role of proofs as a design tool, or what I call proof-aided design. When you design a cryptographic scheme with proofs in mind, the proof itself guides you to good design choices. And when in this proof itinerary you hit a wall, many times you can find counterexamples to your design, or guide you to better choices. And this is also particularly powerful with automated tools that really can work as true debuggers. So, as a summary of my remarks so far, I want to, let me present these, what I call matches made in CryptoHaven. These are great cryptographic couples, theory and practice, proofs and design, conceptual simplicity, and modularity. And they go around feeding each other as recurrent subjects and keeping their relevance over the years, as it is the case with much of the work in cryptography. Okay, so going forward, I will show some samples of past and hopefully still relevant work. I'll focus on the work on bring theoretical cryptography to practice, particularly my involvement with IETF standards over the years, some anecdotes, lessons, and historical context, and some more recent work. And you can see this as an implicit or explicit invitation to you to contribute to deploying sound cryptography in the world. So back to the proof theme, we have made a lot of progress in the acceptance of the need for proofs in the engineering world. When I started working in the IETF, the body that defines standards for the internet, the idea of proofs in cryptography was quite an unheard notion. Today, the situation is much better. It can improve. Certainly, definitely, there is always room for improvement. Examples of the progress that we've made in this direction is the great TLS, the engineering and research collaboration in the design of TLS 1.3, more recent pay competition in the IETF that is still in the stages of standardization. And really proofs became somewhat as an IETF requirement and requirement from proposers of cryptographic schemes. And I see this as really as a cultural change. I don't want to exaggerate here. It's not that everyone says that without a proof we cannot do anything, but definitely there is much more awareness of of the positive effect of proofs in cryptographic schemes. Indeed, you know, I'll say something about the imperfection of proofs, or that's not everything. But I think that the track record of proven schemes is much better than those of unproven schemes. Anyway, so going back to the IETF and IPsec in the 90s, where I started my applied cryptography work, one of the first tasks in the IPsec working group was to define a hash-based MAC. Indeed, the mandate of the IPsec working group was to develop security extensions to the internet protocol, namely encryption and authentication of IP packets. These were HMAC was born. In retrospect, one could argue that HMAC was the first crypto standard to be accepted by having a proof, or at least that was the main consideration in its adoption. But the road to proof recognition, or the value of proof recognition, and in particular sound academic design, was not obvious. And you know, let me just give you an anecdote from that time. Yeah. So one of there were different schemes proposed at the time. One of them was the so-called key prepend mode, in which you take a key, append the message, and hash it together, and that is the MAC value. And we all know that this has the weakness of extension attacks, at least for Merkle-Damgard functions. At the time, MD5 was the function being considered. So this is definitely applied to it. But this is not a problem if you prepend the length to the message before, before hashing this whole thing. I would still objected to the use of prepend mode, at least in particular on grounds of the extension attack, and also the need for generic construction. You know, if you assume that the message has the length at the beginning, this is not a generic construction. Generic construction is one that will apply to any message. But in these discussions, here is a dialogue of the time. People will say, well, this extension attack is not a problem for IPsec because IP packets always carry packet lengths at the beginning, and that's true. The IP header, the first field, is the length of the IP packet. Well, I would still argue that you should not rely on non-cryptographic elements for essential cryptographic functionality. What if the length is omitted in the future? And of course, the answer is really length omitted from the IP packet. Of course, it's always there. So then this is what happened. The first protocol to be defined was this authentication header, which was an authentication-only protocol to apply to IP packets. And indeed, the MAC function here was applied to the whole IP packet. Therefore, it included the header. Therefore, it included the payload length at the beginning. And indeed, for this particular application, the prepend key mode would have been secure. But then the length disappeared. What does that mean? What does that mean? The next protocol is the ESP protocol. It's an authenticated encryption standard for IP. And there is still a MAC, but the MAC did not cover the IP header. It did not cover the IP header because there were some elements in it that could change in transit. Whatever reason, the point is that it did not cover the header, it did not cover the payload length, and therefore this would have been insecure if you use that prepend key mode. So, you know, this is the kind of things that I was trying to instill. You should have a clear model for your functionality, strive to be as generic as possible. Indeed, generic constructions are those that withstand the test of time in the best possible way, because even when applications and settings change around, this construction, usually they still keep being secure. And then do not count on non-cryptographic elements for crucial cryptographic functionality, which is the case of the length. There is the third element that actually I will illustrate in a few more slides. Now, without minimizing anything I said before, I feel that my enthusiastic embrace for proofs can be misunderstood. So let me clarify. I wrote it here, so it is in the published slides. So is the proof the end or culmination of cryptographic design? My answer is no. A proof is the end of a design only for designs that are not used in practice, okay? For designs that move to practice, the proof is the beginning, not the end. It's the foundation, not the culmination. Proofs, now that I become a little poetic, need to travel with design, adapt, and morph into the more complex settings where the design is used. Proofs need to grow and support specifications and implementation. So, you know, proofs are these living organisms that have to grow with the application, but you need them at the foundation to you know, as the basis to build something secure. Okay, so now I'm done with this thing, focus on proofs. And now let's move to another subject on which I have worked extensively over the years, also starting in the 90s in IPsec. This is authenticated key exchange. It is one of these subjects that chases me more than I chase it. You know, I leave it, but always comes back to me. It is such an omnipresent functionality that it shows everywhere and follows me everywhere. But I don't complain. Key exchange is a simple and intuitive notion, and at the same time, one of the most fundamental functionalities in cryptography, and definitely the most deployed cryptographic protocol in the real world. Simple and intuitive, but simplicity and intuition can be very misleading. When you peek inside, there is a lot of complexity to these notions, and the reason for thousands of papers written in this area. By the way, I sometimes write KE and sometimes I write AKE. In all cases, I mean authenticated key exchange. So for IPsec, where I was working on this stuff, there were multiple schemes being considered. As opposed to the case of HMAC, our tools for analysis were quite basic and not rich enough, for example, to reason about composition of protocols or even about authentication in the public setting. I found myself designing protocols with very limited understanding of the theory behind it. And really the models came later, but you know, the design work had to go on. IPsec was not waiting for me or for the models to be developed. So I worked on it even without the understanding. But what I want to show you now is something that relates to the analysis work and modeling work that we did in the years after the design of protocols. And this, what I'm going to tell you now is a work done with Mihir Bellary and Ran Canetti, the same authors of HMAC, but a very different work. So it's one piece that I want to take from here. And it's something that I believe illustrates well these notions of simplicity, of modularity that I have in my mind, and also because I think that this is an example of something that can be used in the future for automated design of protocols, something that we've done relatively very little so far, and I hope that we will see more of it in the future. Okay, so this is, I first tell you something about secure channels, and then we will see how this applies to key exchange. So we consider two models of secure channels, one called AM, authenticated model, where secure channels are ideally authenticated. So when Bob receives a message in its channel from Alice, it knows that it was sent by Alice, it was intended to Bob, and it was not changed in the way. Basically, this models a passive adversary. The UM for an authenticated model or an authenticated channels model is the one where the attacker, a realistic attacker that can change messages, inject messages, move them from one place to another, etc. And of course, designing protocols in the AM, in the ideally authenticated model, is much easier than in the harder UM. And the question we ask ourselves is, can we have a compiler from AM to UM? Namely, can we design protocols in the easy case of AM and somehow automatically or move them the and that's what we call a compiler. So let me show you how this works. We introduced this notion of message authenticators, which I will not define formally here, but I'll show you an example. So as I said, in the ideally authenticated model, if Alice wants to send to Bob a message, she just sends it and she knows that it will get unchanged. In the unauthenticated channels, you need Alice to actually explicitly authenticate the message. So what she's going to do, she will going to send the message and add to it a signature. But this is not good enough because indeed the message originated with Alice because she signed it, but maybe it was intended for someone else, not for Bob, or maybe it was replayed from some other, another message, another session. So a better way of doing that is that Bob will send a nonce to Alice, and Alice will sign the message together with the nonce against replays, and also with the identity of B to say, I am intending this message to Bob. And what we show in this series of works is that if you take a protocol that is secure in the AM, and you apply to each one of the messages of that AM protocol a message authenticator, what you get is a protocol with the same functionality that now is secure in the realistic unauthenticated model channel. So you can see that this is both the design and analysis methodology, again, stressing the modularity of the things. But let me show you now how you use that in the context of key exchange. So we start from a protocol, a key exchange of this protocol in the AM. We know a very well-known protocol. Diffie-Hellman is exactly secure under the decisional Diffie-Hellman in the AM. The compiler said, take every message here and apply a message authenticator. So Alice needs to apply to G to the X, Bob needs to apply to G to the Y. Let me first show how Bob authenticates the message. So the G to the X that Alice sends to Bob, we will think about it right now as a nonce. G to the Y is the message that Bob is trying to authenticate, and Alice is the intended peer. So that's what the message authenticator tells us to do: sign the nonce, sign the message, and the identity of the peer. And now we do the same thing from Alice to Bob. Alice will sign G to the Y as the nonce from Bob, G to the X as her own message, and Bob as the intended recipient. And if that theorem, that compiler actually works, it means that this protocol is secure in the UM. And indeed, this protocol that we call the ISO protocol, because it was somewhat related to an ISO standard that existed at the time, is indeed a secure protocol. Everything I say is oversimplified, but this is the core ideas behind these things. Well, here I want to go back to the third lesson that I didn't describe there. I'm using the Diffie-Hellman values here as nonces and Diffie-Hellman values. You should not do that. You should never have two functionalities on the same element, even if it's cryptographic and it's there. Yeah. As much as possible, everything. So in particular, in a key exchange protocol, you should have explicit nonces. Usually there is no reason not to have it. But for presentational purposes, this is good enough. Also, the way it is written would be open to reflection attacks. Doesn't matter. Again, it's a sketch to get the idea. So, okay. So again, this is a compiler. It shows the power of modularity. And as I said before, I think it's a good starting point for automated design, extended automated analysis. And of course, a question that comes up in this automated design idea is, can AI help? I don't know, but it's a question that maybe we will hear about that in a few years. Okay, so we have a secure key exchange protocol. Was that the protocol that the IPsec could use? And the answer is no. Why no? Because the IPsec had also some privacy requirements on protecting identities. What were these requirements? First, you want to protect identities from eavesdroppers. You know, this is an IPsec, this is the internet protocol, it's open in the internet. Everyone can look at that, so you don't want to disclose identities to an eavesdropper. But moreover, you want to be also secure against an active attacker. What does that mean? It means that at least one of the parties in the protocol may say, I will not disclose my identity until my peer authenticates, which is exactly what happens these days in the internet. When you go to log into a server, you first wait for the server to authenticate, and only then you will disclose your identities. Of course, these days, the way a server authenticates usually is with TLS. Okay? And there's this other element of plausible deniability that I will mention in a minute. So why isn't ISO a privacy-friendly protocol? Well, first of all, against eavesdropper, you can take G to the XY, even if it's unauthenticated, you encrypt your identities with that, and against an eavesdropper, that's good enough, okay? Now, against active attackers, I said, in this case, Alice will say, I will not disclose my identity until Bob authenticates itself, but this is not possible here, because here, each party needs to know the peer's identity before it can authenticate, okay? So there is no situation in which, first you first authenticate and then I tell you who I am. So, and in addition, this protocol signs the identity of the peer, which is also a privacy issue because you leave a proof of communication. Alice leaves a signature that she communicated with Bob. So that was another privacy concern. Now, of course, there is an easy way of solving all the things. Instead of Bob signing the identity of Alice, it will sign its own identity. Instead of Alice signing the identity of Bob, she will sign her own identity. But this protocol would be completely insecure. I mean, really insecure. You can really show in practical terms that this will be insecure. So the protocol that eventually was accepted into the standard is the protocol called the Sigma Key Exchange that I designed around 96. This is unrelated to the Sigma Zero Knowledge protocols of Kramer and Damgard. This is just a name collision, okay? They're unrelated. And here I show this protocol. So now this protocol does not sign the identities. It MAC identities, but it doesn't MAC the peer's identity. It MAC your own identity, okay? And therefore, it has these properties that we needed for privacy. Yeah, Bob now can authenticate before knowing who Alice is. Alice can wait for this authentication, and now she can use the Diffie element that at this point will be an authenticated Diffie element to encrypt her identity, okay? And also this protocol does not sign any identities, therefore it's not leaving a proof of communication. This protocol protects Alice's identities against active attackers. You can do also protect Bob's, but then you need four messages in the protocol. So this protocol was accepted to IPsec. The IPsec key exchange, or also known as IKE. Version 1 was the first version where Sigma appeared. Then it was moved to the second version of IKE, IKE version 2, and eventually many years later, it was adopted as the core the cryptographic core of the handshake in TLS 1.3. So I call this a heavy-duty key exchange because it really protects the entire application TCP IP stack. So better be secure. And indeed, while I designed this in 96, the first proof of the protocol appeared in 2002 in work with Ran Canetti. But since then, there have been many proofs of the protocol in different settings under different models, especially after it was adopted into TLS 1.3. So we really have quite a good confidence in it. And the last thing I want to show about this protocol, this is a slide that I used in my invited talk in Crypto 2003, exactly 20 years ago. Imagine 20 years, it's 2043 from now, so it's a lot of time. I was younger, I believe. Anyway, this shows 4 different protocols that visually look very similar to each other. There are 2 that are secure, 2 that are not secure. The idea is to show that these things are simple but tricky. You have to be careful with little variations and definitely careful with the use of just intuition. Yeah, so I'll skip the scheme part and let's go to the next chapter of the talk. This is about this fantastic primitive called oblivious pseudorandom functions, which I love and I try to use wherever I can because it's great. It's conceptual simplicity, efficiency, many applications, and new challenges for building them post-quantum. So, you know, OPRF deserves a full talk, at least one full talk, and I actually gave one in PKC 2018. There is a very long history starting from Sham's work, and I recommend this survey by Casacuberta, Hesse, and Lehmann on ePrint. If you want to learn more about OPRFs and the basic information on them, this is a very good starting point. Okay, so I told you how amazing this OPRF is. Let me tell you what an OPRF is. So we know what a PRF, a pseudo-random function, is. It's a keyed function that, for those that don't know the key, the function is indistinguishable from random. So if you don't know the key, we can think about it just as a random function. What is an oblivious pseudo-random function? It's a pseudo-random function plus a protocol, a two-party protocol where the user has an input, the server has a key, they talk to each other, and at the end, the user learns the output of the function on its input and nothing else, and the server learns nothing about the input or nothing about the output of the function. Okay, so very, very simple notion, and as I said, powerful. Many, many applications. Private set intersection is probably the most famous one, which itself has many sub-applications. And many other private preserving applications. I will show one application to password protocols and also something I call pre and post quantum insurance. So let me start with the first application, which is to password protocols. So I'm going to show again the notion of compilers and modularity and automatic transformation again here. It's a compiler that takes any key exchange protocol and converts it into a password-based key exchange protocol. So what is a password-based key exchange, or what we call PAKE? And in this case, I'm talking about asymmetric PAKE, where asymmetric is the client server's case of PAKE, which is exactly what we do when we go into the internet and log into a server. The user brings a password. The server has some state related to that password, usually a one-way image of the password. They talk to each other, and then they have a shared secret session key between the server and the user. The state, which is this one-way image of the password, that happens during initial registration of the user on the password with the password. What is the security that we want from this thing? Is this thing I call an all or nothing property. Either the attacker knows the password, and there is nothing we can do about that. It's impersonation is unavoidable, or in the other case, that it doesn't possess the password, then we want this session key, this key exchange, to be as secure as with a full entropy key exchange. What do you mean full entropy key exchange? A key exchange where both parties come with strong private keys. It's not clear a priori that you can achieve these properties, but you can. And this leaves us the only possible attacks, two attacks. One is online guessing. The attacker can always have a guess and check it by talking to the server. And if it has the correct guess, it will validate it. And that's unavoidable. And it costs the attacker one online interaction per guess. The other attack is you go to the server, you break into the server, you find this user state, which is this image of the password, this one-way image of the password, and that doesn't show you the password, but now you can run a exhaustive offline dictionary attack on the password. And again, these two attacks are unavoidable. I will say something about helping against the second one, but now let me finally, Okay. So now I'll show you how to build this asymmetric peak using OPRF. So first, we think about this functionality in which you have a server with some state, some key inside, a user that comes to the server and gets back. It has a password and gets back the secret, but in a way that the server doesn't learn anything, doesn't learn anything about the password, doesn't learn about the secret that was retrieved. In these protocols, each time that the user goes to the server, it retrieves the same secret. How do we implement this functionality? Well, of course, with an OPRF. An OPRF will let you do the things. All you have to do is to define the secret as the output of the function on the password. Okay, so with OPRF, you can do the thing. And once you can do the thing, you can build a symmetric peak. How do you do that? Well, the user takes the secret when it retrieves it, derives from it a private public pair of keys, and now it can use that pair of keys with any public key authentication key exchange. There is an important detail here that the user, when it goes to the server, it needs to know the public key of the server. We are assuming here that the user remembers its password and nothing else. It doesn't have a public key of the server or of a CA, so it's password only protocol. So it needs to retrieve the public key of the server from the server, but how does it know that it's the correct public key? Well, in the registration from this secret S, it will derive a MAC key. It will MAC the public key of the server with the MAC key, and when it retrieves, it will check the MAC against this secret S. Okay. As usual, there are quite a few details around the thing, but this is the idea. So essentially what we show here is that you can use an OPRF as a compiler from a key exchange protocol to an asymmetric peak. And this is an idea that underlies this protocol called OPEIC. I work with Stash Yaretsky and Yahoo Shu. And that is being now standardized in the IETF. Again, details, AIC is not every AIC. It has to be these two properties, forward secrecy and KCI, but most public key-based key exchange protocols will have these properties. All right, so let me say something about how you build these OPRFs, because one of the really nice things about these OPRF applications is that we have very, very efficient and simple and nice implementations. So this is the most famous one, is the one in which, okay, we start by defining a PRF, FKX. How does it work? You take any string X. We have a group of prime order Q. You take your input, you hash it into a random element in the group. And now you take that element to the power of K, where K is a random element in ZQ, which is the key to the PRF. In our applications, this is not good enough. You have to hash this FKX on some other hash function, and for UC proofs, you also need to hash the input. These are details, annoying details, but definitely not what we care about now, since the only thing I care about now is showing you the oblivious protocol that applies to this simplified function, and that's all I need now. So how do you do? Remember, now we want the user to compute the function on X in its input without the server learning anything. So the user comes with the input, hashes the value, the input X into the group, raises it to the power of a random R. This is a random R that is chosen in each execution of this protocol. We call this value A. It goes to the server checks that this A is in the corresponding group. And if so, it just takes this A without doing anything to it except of raising it to the power of K, which is the key that the server has. This goes back to the user, which just needs to raise this B to the power of 1 over R, to de-blind the original R. And that's the way it learns HX to the power of K. And you can see that this blinding factor R basically works as a one-time encryption key when you see A, all possible values of hx are equally possible, and therefore you don't learn anything about x or h of x or the output of the function. All right? So, by the way, this is a information theoretic protection of the input, which is something that in some post-quantum applications, since information theoretic encryption is post-quantum, then this will be good for using the function even in some post-quantum settings. Lastly, the cost of the thing is really quite minimal. One message in each direction, 2 exponentiations for the user and 1 for the server. And there are other great things about this function. There is you can run it as a T out of N threshold function. For example, in the case of opaque that uses an OPRF, if the OPRF is instantiated as a threshold in a multi-server case, then the attacker will need to break into a threshold of servers before it can even start doing a dictionary attack, an offline dictionary attack. So definitely making it the life of the attacker harder. You can do also proactive security, distributed key generation. There is also a verifiability element to this function that I'm not using in this application, so I will not describe, but this is another important element in this instantiation of an OPRF. So that's, I hope that I convince you that this is an interesting primitive. And as I said, this is just one example. There are many other applications. Now I want to present some imaginary applications of Diffie-Hellman and post-quantum OPRFs. I'm not sure that this idea has merit or real utility, but for some reason, I insisted with myself that I want to present it here. So maybe you will find something useful to do with these forward security applications of OPRFs. And to the very least, it should motivate the search for post-quantum OPRFs. So imagine a world where we all move to post-quantum techniques. TLS is run only with post-quantum, not even hybrid, but Diffie-Hellman is not broken. Okay, Alice and Bob don't completely trust this post-quantum only TLS. And so, okay, if they want to do, they can run an hybrid TLS where in parallel to the post-quantum techniques, they use also Diffie-Hellman. So that's definitely an option. But here I want to present a different way of doing this, which is we will assume that we have an OPRF, a Diffie-Hellman OPRF service. This service, will have some key, some OPRF key in its belly, and you can come with an input, and it will give you the output of the OPRF function. Okay, so now what we want to do is the following: Alice and Bob run the post-quantum TLS, which is a blue application here. They take the output, the key that they shared through TLS, which we call it K. It's a blue K. And they take their blue K and put it into the yellow Diffie-Hellman OPRF box and get out of it a green K prime, green because it's a combination of blue and yellow. And they use this K prime as the session key. And it's not hard to see that a future attacker, right now we assume an attacker that cannot break either post-quantum or Diffie-Hellman, but you can see that the future attacker needs to break both post-quantum and Diffie-Hellman. If a PQ-TLS is secure, then the attacker, and the Diffie-Hellman is broken, the attacker will know the input to the function, but we know that the output of the function is secure even for the server that has the key to the OPRF, so even a future attacker will not be able to learn anything about K prime. On the other hand, if post-quantum is broken and Diffie-Hellman is secure, so the attacker will know the blue K, but in an OPRF, even if you know the input, because of the PRF property, you will not know anything about the output. Here I am assuming that in 10 years, where this guy has broken things, the key in the Diffie-Hellman OPRF, the key used 10 years ago is not there. Actually, in this service, you can change keys as often as you want, even once every day. So Yeah, so this gives you an alternative to using a hybrid TLS in this world where everything became post-quantum. But let's go back to this world, the world that we live. We live in a world where the TLS is Diffie-Hellman or classical only. There are ways of extending it to hybrid, and there are experiments, and there are also deployments or at least implementations. But let's now consider only one, the situation in which we are running only classical TLS. And now Alice and Bob want to get assurance, post-quantum assurance. Again, they can use hybrid, but here is the other option. In this option, Alice and Bob run the yellow TLS with Diffie-Hellman. They get the yellow key K, and now they input it into the post-quantum OPRF. If we had post-quantum OPRFs these days of the efficiency of the Diffie-Hellman OPRF, you could even think about this as a possibility of doing hybrid hybrid security. Here again, it's a yellow K, goes into a blue, and you get an output, a green output K prime, and the same way, for the same reasons I showed before, this thing is actually secure under both post-quantum and classical, and voila, hybrid forward security against post-quantum and Diffie-Hellman without touching TLS. As I said, I am not knowing if this has at least practical merit, but I don't know, for some reason I thought that at least conceptually, the idea that you can get a secure post-quantum TLS without touching TLS sounded like an interesting thing to me. But of course, do we have post-quantum OPRF? Okay, so the answer is yes, but maybe not efficient enough, depending, of course, on the applications. So there's work on lattice-based OPRF. Right now, the constructions we have are quite inefficient, but people are working on this, and I'm sure we will see progress in the near future. Another approach is to use multi-party computation. So you can take any classical PRF, for example, AES, and run a secure two-party computation on top of this function. We know how to do these two-party protocols with post-quantum security, with symmetric, like garbled circuits, maybe with some lattice OTs. Anyway, there are different ways of doing that. And actually, there is quite a relatively efficient implementation of things, again, depending on the application. But, for something high scale, this may not be efficient enough, especially in terms of communication. And then there is this new or relatively recent approach of trying to build symmetric primitives that are MPC friendly. So AES, when you run an MPC protocol in AES, it's a big circuit. This translates into communication. Can we build things that are still PRF, say, or one-way functions, but when we run our multi-party technology on them, we get more efficient stuff. And we call this MPC-friendly primitive, or in this case, MPC-friendly pseudo-random functions. And there are proposals for specialized constructions. All of them require cryptanalysis because they are new. But there's some very interesting instantiations, ideas. And I want to show one. This is a work by Bonnet et al. Something I find really exciting and intriguing. They call this function of direction dark matter. That doesn't matter why, for some dark reasons. So this is the function. You take an input, a string of bits. You apply a linear transformation modulo 3. You look now at the bits as elements in this 3. There is a matrix that you multiply with, and this is a public transformation. And then the output of that you input into a modulo 2. linear transformation. This time it is a secret one. Actually, it's a matrix that is the key to the function. And that output you pass again through some transformation modulus 3. And this last transformation is also public. So that's the function. The security is supposed to come from this combination of two different primes in the field on which you work. And there are some basic ideas from complexity theory why this may be a good idea. But this is published in 2018. There has been work in that paper and in follow-up work on cryptanalysis. Things are very new and require more attention, but that's exactly why I'm citing it here, because I think this is, in general, a direction that we need to look more into it, and just encourage you guys to look at that. If you want things like weak OPRF and semi-honest parties, these things are already very, very efficient. If you need strong OPRFs and malicious parties, then they are less efficient. But definitely a lot of potential here, and there are other directions in this area. So I think it's a good thing to look at. Now that I told you how important it is to find post-quantum OPRF instantiation, I will tell you that not all cases that today use Diffie-Hellman OPRF require to move to post-quantum. And one example is this opaque protocol, this asymmetric pake that I mentioned. It is an instantiation of the idea of the compiler from APE to APEK. So in opaque, if you use Diffie-Hellman OPRF, and in 10 years from now, that function is broken, the only thing that the attacker will be able to do is to run an offline dictionary attack on your password from 10 years ago. So I have two recommendations here. If you do opaque, keep using Diffie-Hellman OPRF and change your password in the next 10 years, okay? So more often than every 10 years. There are other applications. For example, there is this other oblivious key management system that builds on the fact that the input to the OPRF is information theoretically protected, and therefore is even post-quantum when the OPRF is not. And I had this example of using Diffie-Hellman to protect against post-quantum. So there are another application of Diffie-Hellman OPRFs. So we need to look for post-quantum OPRFs, but on the other hand, it's not that we have to throw out everything that uses the HOPRF. Okay, so final remarks. These are final remarks about all that I would have liked to cover if I had a semester or two. So I believe we are in a new cryptographic golden age. We had several of these over the years, all brought by technology and societal changes. We start with the foundation age. I mean, these are made up names. The foundations age that brought by DES and the commercial cryptography, and of course the invention of public key, then through the internet and cloud revolutions, and now to the current, what I call private computing golden age. There are many triggers to this private computing age. I will only mention some briefly, very briefly. Blockchains, the very notion of, blockchain are decentralized computing platforms, not all of the things that you hear in the news. So blockchains, the very notion of large-scale decentralization brings many new applications, requirements, and challenges. Identity systems that need to bridge between decentralization on one hand and aggregation of a lot of private data on the other. And then there is a lot of privacy awareness brought by new regulation and what I would call industry excesses, like targeted advertisement. Then there is the AI, the elephant in the room, that's bringing new problems, many challenges, from a privacy issue to safeguarding malicious uses, to combating disinformation, and even confronting some apocalyptic scenarios. And finally, the ever-expanded data and computation outsourcing to the cloud also presents very interesting challenges for private computing. So nothing deep here, but just to give an idea of the many things that for those working on this area of private computing, which is most of us, in some way or the other, this is really an amazing time to work in these things. And of course, we have private computing tools. Many of these tools, many fall under multi-party computation, but we have all these tools that we developed over the decades, not just the years, but also they're very new, really exciting and beautiful primitives. And the one I want to really, a special mention goes to Snarks, which I really think is a truly marvelous primitive with nothing short of miraculous progress in recent years. This is my favorite thing. If you are not aware of what's going in that area, you should know, because it's just amazing. So they expand cryptography from the realm of privacy to that of computation, of computation integrity and verification. And finally, a question that I think we need to study more and understand more, which is what is the role of hardware, of secure hardware, or the so-called, at least, secure enclaves in our toolbox. We can go to one extreme saying, these are perfect trusted parties and we can all go home. Or you can say, don't even touch them. I'm not sure that that's the right idea. And if we are using them, how we model them, are these honest but curious parties? Anyway, there is work done in this area. I think we have to do more technically, and also, I don't know, I would call it, maybe not ideologically, but, trying to get a feeling of where are we with these things? And finally, the question, we have made a lot of progress, and we are in this true private computing golden age. But are we seeing ubiquitous private computing deployed in the world? Or a question, are we there yet? So my answer is no, but it is up to us to make it happen. Writing papers, yes, but also actively engaging in the engineering, business, and policy world. And always remembering basic principles and matches made in heaven. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please come up to one of these microphones in the front of the room.
As I expected, I answered all questions. So.
All right. Well, I guess okay. We've got one.
Hello?
Is it turned on?
I don't know if it's on.
Yes.
First, congratulations, Argentina, on the World Cup. That's one. My question is, when you add hardware to the question here, I don't think it's on. But
I don't think can we get the microphone turned? Pause for 1 second too. Quick announcement as everyone is going to lunch. Participant lost their keys in either Lottie or MCC. So if anyone happens to find them, please turn them into the registration desk. Thank you.
Yeah.
Why don't we...
Now it's working? Yes, I hear. Okay. When you add hardware, which is important, or applications to this equation, like here in the conference, we have a lot of side channels and a whole slew that comes with hardware. So are you proposing basically that we expand the area of art to include that along with the attacks and other things that really come from the physical world? Because I live on that physical world, so for me, it's always been the bridge of how we get from the theoretical to the practical, and to be able to have protocols that helps the designers make less mistakes or leak less, things like that.
Yeah. So really the question is about, given attacks that we have on hardware, but on the other hand, benefits of hardware. So I'm not answering the question if you should use or not use. I'm raising the question, but you're right. Since there are all these elements about side channel attacks, and some other sophisticated attacks against hardware, then you could say, okay, I don't want to touch this stuff because it's too dangerous and I don't understand it. What I'm saying is we should understand this better. We should understand it at the practical level of what is possible to hide or not hide or protect, but also at the level on the theory part, how we model this. So how do we reason about the things when we build protocols rather than in an ad hoc way, arguing about each one of these applications. No, yeah, yes. So I'm not saying that the end result of this investigation will be expanding the things, killing it completely, or killing all of us completely because it's a trusted party and you don't need cryptography anymore, or most of the cryptography. So I'm not taking any position here because I really don't know. I'm quite sure that we should not be in the extremes, but I'm just raising this as a question to investigate. Okay.
All right, let's thank our speaker again.